The morning I got fired, the sun was shining too brightly for what was coming. That's what I remember most. That, and the smell of burnt coffee from the break room down the hall. Sharp, bitter, oddly appropriate. I arrived early, like always. My cubicle still had a slight chill, the kind that lingers in tall glass buildings before the air conditioning kicks in. I placed my bag under the desk, turned on the monitor, and watched it blink to life. Another day. Another set of budget spreadsheets. Another hour of pretending I was still doing what I loved. Laura Rise Solutions had been my home for 8 years. I'd started as a junior financial analyst, fresh out of grad school, unsure of my footing, but full of hope. By year 5, I was leading the department. By year 7, I was managing regional accounts worth more than most homes in my zip code. Then the merger happened. We were told it was a strategic consolidation, a fresh vision, a bolder future. I didn't believe the buzzwords, but I smiled like we all did. What other choice did we have? Our old CEO, Malcolm Trent, was all warmth and war stories, a man who remembered birthdays and brought his dog into the office every Friday. He shook hands with everyone from the mailroom to the boardroom, but after the merger, he was quietly transitioned out. In came Cassandra Vane, the new CEO, Harvard-educated, high-heeled, and razor-sharp. She walked like she owned time itself and smiled like it was optional. I saw her twice before that day, once in a team-wide Zoom meeting and once in the hallway. She didn't recognize me either time. I suppose I didn't stand out anymore, not to someone like her. Maybe I never did. That morning, at exactly 9:13 a.m., an email pinged across the office system. Mandatory company address, floor 6 open atrium, 9:30 sharp. I hesitated. Messages like that always carried an edge. In the atrium, people gathered awkwardly, coffee cups in hand, trying to look casual. I stood near the back, next to the glass railing that overlooked the city skyline. I could see my reflection in it. Pale face, too little sleep, eyes too aware. Cassandra stood on the raised step, her posture perfect, voice clear. As part of our realignment for Q4 objectives, she said, we've made some difficult but necessary decisions. I didn't even hear my name until she paused and glanced down at the folder in her hands. Eva Carson, she said, flat and unblinking. Thank you for your contributions. Unfortunately, your role has been impacted by the restructuring. Please see HR for next steps. That was it. No explanation. No context. Just erased. In front of the whole company. I didn't even realize I'd dropped my coffee until I heard the paper cup hit the floor, liquid spreading like shame across the tiles. Around me, no one moved. No one spoke. Not Ben from Strategy, who I coached through his first client pitch. Not Jenna from HR, who once called me crying because her boyfriend cheated. Not even Michael, who used to joke we were the brains of the floor. They all looked down. Or away. Like I'd just turned to smoke. Cassandra moved on. The next name. Another person deleted. I couldn't feel my legs, but I moved anyway. One step, then another. Each louder than it should have been, like the building wanted everyone to hear. I reached the hallway, my breath shallow. My chest felt tight, like the walls were closing in. That's when I saw her. Rosa, the janitor. Mid-60s maybe, silver-streaked hair always tied in a bun. She was pushing her cart slowly, like time didn't apply to her. Rosa was the kind of person you didn't notice until you needed paper towels or the microwave was broken. But she always noticed everyone. She stopped right in front of me. Didn't say hello. Didn't ask what happened. She just reached into the side pocket of her uniform and pressed something into my palm. A small, cool object. A key. It's time, she whispered, her voice low but steady. You've waited long enough. I looked at her, confused. But she only smiled. Not with her lips, but with something in her eyes. And then she walked away. I stood there in that fluorescent-lit hallway, surrounded by silence and artificial air. My severance papers were still in my hand. My job was gone. My name had been spoken like a line item, and yet in my other hand, I held something else entirely. A key. I didn't know what door it opened, or why Rosa had it, but I knew this much. It wasn't just for a lock. It was a beginning, or maybe a return. Something old, something waiting. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something like breath rise in my chest. Not hope, not yet, but the space where hope could live. I didn't go back to my desk. Maybe I should have. Maybe I should have packed up my things like they expected. Quiet, obedient, grateful for the opportunity to be dismissed in full view. But I couldn't do it. Not yet. Not while Cassandra was still talking like nothing had happened and the others were nodding along like we were all characters in someone else's story. Instead, I found myself walking. Down the stairwell, past floors that used to hum with energy, now cold and corporate. I reached the lobby where the air smelled of marble polish and last chances. I stepped out into the morning light, blinking like I hadn't seen real sky in years. I looked down at the key Rosa had given me. It was old, brass maybe, warm from my hand. The kind with teeth that weren't cut by machines but forged by time. No tag, no note, just weight and silence. I turned it over between my fingers and realized something strange. It wasn't unfamiliar. I had seen this key before. Not exactly this one, but something like it. Years ago, on a hook behind my grandmother's door. She used to call it her emergency key, though I never knew what door it belonged to. After she passed, her things had been divided, donated, or tossed. I never saw the key again, until now. I walked aimlessly for blocks, letting the city wrap around me like a coat I didn't know I needed. Horns honked, phones rang, people moved with purpose, and I had none. I sat down on a bench outside a closed bookstore. A pigeon limped past my feet. I watched it, numb. And then, like a slow-blooming ache, the shame started to settle in. Not because I lost the job. I think part of me had been losing it for a long time. But because of the way it happened. The how. Like I was a chair they no longer needed. Like I was nothing. That office had seen so much of me. My best ideas, my hardest days. The morning I came in red-eyed from signing my divorce papers. The quiet nights I stayed late to fix someone else's mistake. Birthdays I skipped. Calls I ignored because just one more quarter, I kept telling myself. And now? A 30-second announcement. A cold folder. A key from a janitor. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and opened my text messages. My sister had sent a picture of her new puppy earlier that morning. A fluffy golden thing named Peanut. She didn't know yet. I didn't tell her. There was one unread message from 2 days ago. Rosa, are you still holding your breath, Mija? I stared at it. Hadn't responded. Thought it was just one of her odd, poetic questions. Now, it felt like a thread being tugged. Like maybe she'd known something all along. I scrolled up, reading the other messages she'd sent me over the past few months. Always short. Always kind. Things like, try drinking ginger tea before sleep. It helps with the racing. Don't let them steal your color, Eva. I'd smiled at the time, but I hadn't listened. A cold wind blew and I clutched my coat tighter. Then the thought landed, heavy and insistent. What if the key wasn't to a place? What if it was to a moment? A decision? A shift? A version of me I'd forgotten? I stood and began walking again. My legs knew the direction before my mind did. Rosa lived above the laundromat on 6th and Fletcher. She'd mentioned it once during a staff luncheon I barely remembered. Something about broken stairs and the smell of soap in the walls. I didn't even know if she'd be home, but I went anyway. The laundromat bells jingled as I passed through, the scent of detergent and warmth wrapping around me like a memory. I climbed the stairs slowly, each one creaking like it wanted to be part of the story. At the top was a green-painted door with a cracked frame. I knocked. Once. Then again. It opened a few seconds later. Rosa stood there in a worn sweater and socks, holding a mug of something herbal. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't ask why I was there. She just nodded once and stepped aside. I walked in. The apartment was small, cozy, filled with plants and light and shelves full of books that didn't match. On one wall was a painting, not framed, just pinned, of a woman sitting in a field of wild grass, her hair loose, her hands stained with dirt and sunlight. "She's you," Rosa said quietly. I turned to her, confused. "She doesn't know it yet," she continued, sipping her tea. "But she's you, the version that remembered how to live." I opened my palm and showed her the key. "Why did you give me this?" I asked. She smiled. "Because every lock that's ever mattered is on the inside," she said. "You just needed something to hold while you found the courage to open it." I stared at the brass shape in my hand. For the first time all day, I felt warm. Rosa didn't ask me to sit, but I did. Her apartment invited you to pause, like the kind of library where silence wasn't empty, just sacred. She returned with another mug and placed it in front of me. Chamomile, maybe. It smelled like warmth and something faintly floral. We didn't speak for a while, and strangely, I didn't feel rushed to fill the space. In the office, silence always meant tension, the kind that swelled right before someone was thrown under the bus. But here, silence felt like permission. "I always wondered how you kept going," I finally said, breaking the quiet. "How you could work in that place and still smile every morning." She looked up from her tea. "Because I don't work in that place. I clean it. That's different." I let the words settle. They weren't defensive, just true. She leaned forward slightly, folding her hands. "You stayed long after the place stopped seeing you," she said softly. "Long after it stopped feeding you." "I thought I was being responsible," I replied, staring into the steam rising from my mug. "Safe. Consistent. I had bills, and after the divorce, I didn't want to start over again." Rosa nodded like she knew that road too well. "But you didn't get safe," she said. "You got small." That stung, not because it was cruel, because it wasn't. "I used to paint," I admitted, surprising even myself with the confession. "Before the job, before Ben, before everything got practical." Her face lit up like she'd just found the missing word in a crossword. "I know," she said, standing suddenly and walking toward the hallway. "Come." I followed her, mug still in hand. She led me through a narrow hallway lined with faded photographs and open books stacked on the floor like stepping stones. At the end of the hall was a wooden door, painted blue and chipped at the edges. She pulled it open and light poured in. It was a sunroom, but not the kind you see in catalogs. It was cluttered and imperfect, worn canvases leaning against the wall, dried-out paint jars lined up on a crooked shelf, brushes in a chipped vase. A small table sat in the center with a stool and an old radio perched beside it. "This is where I come to remember who I am," she said, walking to the window. "It's not big, it's not fancy, but it's mine." I stepped further inside. The air smelled of turpentine and lemon oil, and the light made everything glow in muted golds. On the far wall, there was a series of unfinished paintings, faces half-rendered. Colors paused mid-thought. "You paint?" I asked. She gave a small laugh. "Number Lorraine painted. My sister. I just kept her space the way she left it." "She was an artist?" Rosa nodded. "The best kind. The kind that didn't care who saw." She turned and looked at me with something gentle but heavy. "I think you're like her," she said. "But you've been living as if the only thing that mattered was being digestible." I blinked at that. Digestible. It was exactly the word. I'd spent years shaving down my edges to fit into cubicles and conference rooms, smiling when I wanted to scream, apologizing for existing too brightly. And now, what? "I don't know what to do next," I whispered, more to the room than to Rosa. She walked over, placed a hand on my shoulder. "That's because you're asking the wrong question," she said. "The question isn't what, it's who." The silence after that was thick, but this time I welcomed it. That evening, I didn't go home right away. I wandered through streets I used to know when I was younger, past the diner where I used to sketch people on napkins while waiting for a shift to end, past the bookstore where I'd once applied for a part-time job and got rejected because artists don't last. Every corner felt like a breadcrumb, leading me somewhere I hadn't dared to go. When I finally reached my apartment, the sky had darkened. I took off my shoes at the door and sat at my kitchen table. The severance papers were still in my bag. I didn't take them out. Instead, I opened the drawer beside the fridge, the one I hadn't touched in years. At the very back, underneath an old takeout menu and expired coupons, was a sketchbook. It was bent, a little dusty, but still there. I ran my fingers across the cover like it was something sacred. Then I opened it. The first few pages were full of sketches, lines hesitant but alive. A woman at a bus stop, a crumpled jacket, someone's hands resting in their lap. And then blankness, pages untouched, years untouched, until now. I didn't draw that night. I just sat with the book in my lap, like holding the memory of a friend I'd abandoned. But I knew I would. Soon. It happened 3 days later. I hadn't touched a pencil in almost 6 years. But that morning, I woke up before my alarm, made coffee, and cleared the corner of my kitchen table like I used to. It was instinct, muscle memory maybe, as if some part of me had been stretching quietly in the dark, waiting for space. The sketchbook sat open in front of me, its blank page like a dare. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the pencil, a mechanical one, half empty with a cracked rubber grip. I stared at the page for a long time, unsure where to start. But eventually, my hand moved. Not with intention, not with confidence, just with need. I drew a line. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't even straight. But it was real. And that one line opened something. Suddenly, I was sketching again. The chipped mug in my sink, the folds in the curtain, the curve of my own shoulder in the mirror. The drawings came in fits and starts, half-formed and imperfect, but with a quiet urgency that made me forget the fear. By noon, I'd filled 5 pages. I didn't post anything, didn't call anyone. I just kept going. That night, Rosa texted me. "Rosa, the door is still open if you want light." I didn't reply, but I knew where I'd be the next morning. Rosa gave me a key to Lorraine's sunroom. No speeches, no conditions. Just handed it to me in a brown envelope marked L. "Light needs a home," she said simply, "and this one's been waiting." From that day on, the sunroom became my ritual. Every morning, I left my apartment at 6:30 a.m. sharp. I'd grab a coffee from the same bodega on 9th, nod at the same sleepy cashier, and walk the 6 blocks to Rosa's building. The laundromat workers got used to seeing me. Some smiled, others just nodded, as if I was becoming a regular in a world I hadn't known existed. The sunroom was cold at first, but Rosa brought me an old heater and a space to store my things. A tin of pencils, a stack of mixed paper, a folding chair that creaked when I leaned too far back. I didn't care. It was perfect. The first week, I just sketched. Nothing finished, nothing clean. My fingers were clumsy, my proportions off, my eyes slow to see. But I didn't stop. By the second week, the lines began to breathe. I started drawing people again, faces from memory. A woman reading on the subway, a man laughing with his mouth wide open. Rosa, in profile, sipping tea and humming softly to herself. I taped them to the walls, not to display them, but to remind myself, "You're here." I had no plan. No career move, no brand or social media strategy, just paper and light and breath. But something was shifting. And then something happened I wasn't ready for. One afternoon, Rosa knocked gently on the door with a woman beside her. Mid-40s, sharp bob, glasses perched low on her nose. She was holding a baby in one arm and a tote bag in the other. This is Lila, Rosa said. She's my niece. Lila smiled, tired and warm. I heard you sketch, she said, stepping into the room. Would you ever consider doing a portrait? I blinked. A portrait? Of him, she said, nodding at the baby now chewing his sleeve. Just something small. I can pay. I want to remember this age before it disappears. I almost said no. The fear reared up fast, sharp, familiar. What if it's not good enough? What if she regrets asking? But then I saw Rosa behind her, watching me. Not with expectation, just stillness. And I said yes. It took 3 days. I worked quietly, adjusting lines, studying the soft shape of the baby's cheek from the reference photo Lila emailed me. I used charcoal and pastels, blending until the smudges felt like breath. When I handed it to her, she stared at it in silence. Oh, she whispered, blinking fast. It's him. She pressed a $50 bill into my hand and hugged me before leaving. That night, I cried, not because of the money, but because I had created something that mattered. Something real. And the next morning, I returned to the sunroom and pinned that sketch beside the window. Not as a trophy, but as a beginning. Lila's portrait was the first thing I'd been paid for in almost a month. It wasn't much, not by corporate standards, just $50 folded into my palm. But it felt like oxygen. It wasn't about the money. It was about the exchange. Someone had seen value in my hands again. Word spread in small, surprising ways. Lila told her friend from a parenting group who messaged me for a sketch of her twins. A neighbor of Rosa's asked for a charcoal drawing of her late husband from an old photograph. A barista from the cafe downstairs stopped me in the laundromat to ask if I'd ever done mural work. By the end of the month, I had 4 small commissions and a voicemail from a local yoga studio looking for art for their lobby. I was stunned. For years, I had defined my worth by metrics and salary bands, performance reviews, efficiency reports, titles and emails with "sent from my iPhone" tagged at the bottom like a badge of stress. But here I was, without any of that. Just a sketchbook, a folding chair, and people quietly saying, "Can you draw this for me?" Every time I accepted a request, I felt like I was slowly sewing myself back together. Not perfectly. The stitches were crooked, but they held. Rosa watched all of it with the calm patience of someone who had seen seasons turn before. She never hovered. She just brought tea, asked questions when the time was right, and sometimes left slips of paper with quotes or sketches drawn in her soft, looping hand. One morning, I found a small note tucked under my sketch pad. It read, "A quiet life can be a loud act of defiance. Lorraine." I carried that with me all day. That same afternoon, Rosa surprised me again. "There's something you need to see," she said, her eyes soft but insistent. She led me 2 floors down, past the laundromat's back exit and through an alley I'd never noticed before. At the end of it was a single metal door, rusted, dented, with chipped blue paint around the frame. She pulled out a second key from her coat pocket and handed it to me. "Go on," she said. I hesitated. "What is this?" She didn't answer, just nodded. I unlocked the door. It creaked as I pushed it open. What lay beyond stopped me cold. It was a wide, open space, dusty and dim, but breathtaking. Exposed brick walls, high ceilings with beams crisscrossing like bones, and tall windows along the east side that let in a honey gold light even through the grime. There were boxes stacked against one wall, old furniture draped in white sheets, and shelves full of forgotten things. "It used to be Lorraine's," Rosa said quietly behind me. "Before the sunroom. Her first studio, I stepped inside slowly, reverently. The air was thick with old wood and forgotten color. I could almost hear music lingering in the dust. She wanted it to be more," Rosa continued. "A place for people like her. Artists who didn't have titles or degrees, just hands, just stories." She looked at me. "I think it's time." I swallowed hard. "Time for what?" Rosa smiled. Time for you to stop surviving and start building. At first, I protested. I don't have money for rent. I'm not ready. I don't even know if this is sustainable. She held up a hand. I'm not asking for rent. I'm offering space and faith. Lorraine would have done the same. I stood there in silence, the key still warm in my hand, the light catching particles in the air like floating echoes. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch, staring at a rough floor plan I'd scribbled in my notebook. Ideas poured in faster than fear could stop them. Community workshops, shared easels, beginner classes on weekends. Nothing fancy. Just access. Just light. I thought of all the women I used to work with. Brilliant, overworked, unseen. Who once mentioned they used to draw, or missed painting, or wished they had time. What if there was a place for them? A place for anyone who had forgotten what they loved before the world told them who to be? That idea held me through the night. At sunrise, I went back to the old studio, opened the door, and let the light in. It didn't feel like a restart. It felt like a return. 6 months later, I stood in the center of the old studio, barefoot, paint on my wrist, music low in the background, and looked around at the room that no longer echoed. It breathed now, like it had been waiting to come back to life all this time. And I had too. What began as dust and memory was now a working space, humble but alive. The cracked windows had been cleaned, the beams dusted. The light, once slanting and cold, now poured in with purpose through linen curtains I'd found at a thrift store. We named it the second line. Rosa thought of it. It's a term in music, she told me one day, handing me her worn jazz records. The second line dances behind the first. It's the celebration after the sorrow. That's what this place should be. It stuck. The second line became more than a studio. It became a place people found themselves again. Wednesday evenings, we hosted free art nights. Anyone could come, no experience required. We provided supplies, soft music, and tea in mismatched mugs. Some people came just to sit and watch. Others brought old sketchbooks with pages they were afraid to turn. Saturday mornings, we opened the space for kids from the neighborhood. We called it Color Hour. They'd come in with crayons and leave with fingers stained in pastels, faces proud. I taught my first workshop in October, drawing the everyday. We filled all 10 spots. The first time I wrote Instructor Eva Carson on the sign-in board, I almost laughed. Not because I didn't believe it, but because it had taken me this long to say it out loud. I was an artist. Rosa still came by, of course. She refused to call herself co-founder, but she brought cookies, cleaned brushes, and told stories to anyone who would listen. She still wore her janitor uniform most days, said it reminded her of who she was before the world told her she wasn't enough. One morning, as we arranged a new batch of charcoal sticks in a repurposed flower vase, she looked at me and said, "You know, I gave you a key that day, but you were already unlocked." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, swallowing a lump in my throat. Not long after, I got a letter in the mail, a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a short printed note. Ms. Carson, per the terms of your severance agreement, please note that your 6-month non-compete clause has expired. We wish you well in your future endeavors. Laura Rise Human Resources. No name, no warmth. I folded it in half and tossed it into the recycling bin. No ceremony, just closure. They never knew what I became. Maybe they never cared, but that didn't matter anymore. Because every week I saw people walk into my studio and exhale. People who had forgotten what it felt like to use their hands for joy. People who weren't asking permission anymore. People like me. One rainy afternoon, a woman came into the studio as I was cleaning up after class. She looked familiar. Tight bun, crisp shirt, tired eyes. "Ava?" she asked. It was Jenna. Jenna from HR, from the office, from the day I was erased. She looked nervous, holding a worn sketchbook with the corner torn. "I saw your name online," she said, "and I don't know if you remember, but I used to draw. Before everything. I nodded slowly. Of course I remember. She looked down. I should have said something that day. I froze. I'm sorry. I walked over, gently touching her arm. We all froze, I said. But you're here now. That's what matters. She let out a breath like she'd been holding it for years. I pulled out a stool. Come, sit. Let's draw something together. She smiled. A real one. That night, as the sky turned to soft ink outside the windows, we sketched in silence. Two women who had once sat behind desks, quietly breaking, now quietly healing. These days, I still wake up early. I make coffee the way Rosa taught me, with a pinch of cinnamon, and walk to the studio before the sun is fully awake. I sit by the window, sketch pad in my lap, and let my hands move without needing a reason. Sometimes I still hear Cassandra's voice in my head. The way she said, "Your role has been impacted." Like I was a spreadsheet she could delete. But her voice is quieter now. What's louder is the rustle of paper, the laughter of kids covered in ink, the sound of Jenna humming as she sketches a skyline from memory, and Rosa's words, "You were already unlocked." The world didn't give me a title. It handed me a severance letter. And Rosa? She handed me a key. One that led me not just to a door, but to a room full of forgotten light. And this time, when I walk in, it knows my name.